The sound of a refrigerator when it finally cuts out is not a silence, it is a weight. It is the sudden, heavy realization that the hum of normalcy has been paid for with a currency you no longer possess. I sat at my kitchen table, the wood grain worn smooth by years of elbows and spilled milk, and watched the digital clock on the stove blink 12:00, 12:00, 12:00, 12:00. It was a rhythmic green heartbeat of failure. I knew exactly why it happened. I had pushed the utility bill 3 days past the shutoff notice, gambling that the city wouldn't send a truck out until Monday. It was Friday night. My daughter Maya was sleeping in the next room, her breathing rhythmic and slightly whistled, the sound that usually kept me awake with anxiety, but tonight it was just the metronome for my own calculation. I opened my laptop. The screen was too bright, a clinical white glare that made my eyes ache. I didn't need to look at the balance to know it was low, but I needed to see the numbers to believe they were real. $12.42. That was the remaining life force of our household, until Wednesday. I pulled a yellow legal pad toward me. This was the 2 a.m. math, the invisible war of the checkbook that no one sees, because it happens in the dark, under the cover of a sleeping house. It is a geometry of survival, where the lines never quite meet. In my peripheral vision, my phone buzzed. A notification from a social media app. I shouldn't have looked. I knew I shouldn't have looked. But the blue light was a magnet. There he was. My ex-husband Mark stood on a white sand beach, his arms outstretched, eyes closed in a curated expression of serenity. The caption read, "Finding my center at this healing retreat, grateful for the space to breathe and realign. The salt air is the only medicine I need." The irony was a physical sensation in my throat, a dry, sharp constriction. Maya's inhaler was sitting on the counter, the plastic casing cracked at the base, and I knew there were only 3 doses left. I looked at the legal pad. The math was immutable. The utility reconnection fee was $75. The inhaler copay was $50. The gas tank in my car was hovering just above the red line, and I had a 20-mile commute to the dental office where I worked as a receptionist. There is a specific kind of exhaustion that isn't about sleep. It's a cellular depletion. It's the feeling of holding up a ceiling with your bare hands and realizing that if you shift your weight to scratch your nose, the whole structure collapses. I reached into the pocket of my cardigan and felt the small, hard shape of the object I'd been carrying for 3 weeks. It was a silver locket, heavy and cold. It had belonged to my grandmother. Inside was a picture of her as a young woman in Poland, and a small lock of my mother's hair from when she was a baby. It was the only thing of value I had left that wasn't bolted to the floor. The air in the kitchen began to grow warm. Without the hum of the fridge, the house felt porous, as if the night was leaking in through the walls. I got up and walked to the refrigerator. I opened the door, and the smell of cooling milk and wilting spinach drifted out. It smelled like the end of something. I took out a carton of eggs and set them on the counter. If I boiled them all now, they might last a few days without spoilage. This is what they don't tell you about poverty. It's not just the absence of money. It's the constant, high-stakes management of ruin. It's the way your brain becomes a calculator that only performs subtractions. I thought about the word healing. Mark used it like a shield. He had left 18 months ago, claiming he was suffocating under the weight of domesticity. He told the mediator he needed to find himself before he could be a consistent father. Finding himself apparently involved a $5,000 yoga excursion to Tulum, while I was sitting in a dark kitchen deciding which basic human necessity was the most optional. He hadn't sent the child support payment this month. He said the retreat was an investment in his future stability, which would ultimately benefit Maya. I looked at the locket on the table. The silver was tarnished, a dull gray that seemed to absorb the stove's blinking light. I had promised my mother I would never part with it. I had told her it would be Maya's one day, but Maya's lungs didn't care about heritage. They cared about albuterol. I picked up the pen and wrote the number 50 at the top of the page. Then I wrote 75. Underneath, I wrote the word gas. I stared at the list until the letters blurred. There is a shame in this that is hard to name. It's not the shame of being poor. It's the shame of being the only one who cares that you are. It's the shame of the quiet miracle. Every morning, I woke up, did my hair, put on a professional blouse, and sat at a desk, greeting patients who complained about their insurance premiums. I smiled. I offered them water. I scheduled their cleanings. No one knew that I had walked 2 miles to the bus stop because I was saving the last gallon of gas for an emergency. No one knew that I was eating the crusts of Maya's sandwiches for lunch. The silence of the house was interrupted by a cough. It was a dry barking sound from the bedroom. My heart skipped. I stood up and moved through the dark hallway, my hands skimming the walls. Maya was tangled in her sheets, her forehead damp. I sat on the edge of the bed and put my hand on her chest. I could feel the rattle. It was faint, like a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. "Mama?" she whispered, her eyes fluttering open. "I'm here, baby. You're okay. Is the power out?" she asked, noticing the lack of the nightlight's blue glow. "Just a little flicker," I lied. The lie felt like a stone in my mouth. "Go back to sleep. I'm fixing it." I stayed there until her breathing leveled out, but the rattle didn't go away. I went back to the kitchen and looked at the locket. I felt like a thief. I was stealing from her future to pay for her present. But the alternative was a phone call to Mark, asking for the money he owed us, which would result in a lecture about my scarcity mindset and how my negative energy was the reason the finances were tight. I couldn't do it. I couldn't give him the satisfaction of hearing the tremor in my voice. I picked up the locket and a small velvet bag. I would go to the pawn shop on the corner of 4th Street as soon as they opened at 9 a.m. I calculated the bus route. If I left at 8:15, I could be there when the gate rolled up, get the cash, hit the pharmacy, and then get to the utility office before they closed for the weekend. It was a tight window. It required everything to go perfectly. In my life, nothing ever went perfectly. The morning light was gray and unforgiving. It showed the dust on the baseboards and the pile of mail I had been avoiding. I dressed Maya in her favorite yellow shirt. I told her we were going on an adventure, which is the code word for we are doing something difficult that I need you to be brave for. We walked to the bus stop. The air was crisp, and I watched her closely, terrified the walk would trigger an attack. Every time she breathed in deeply, I held my own breath. The pawn shop was a narrow, dim place that smelled of stale cigarettes and old metal. The man behind the counter didn't look up when I walked in. He was busy cleaning a glass case filled with watches. I placed the locket on the black velvet pad. "I'd like to sell this," I said. My voice sounded thin, like a radio station losing its signal. He picked it up with a pair of tweezers, his loupe pressed to his eye. He didn't see the history. He didn't see my grandmother's kitchen in Krakow, or my mother's first steps. He saw 925 sterling silver and a generic hinge. $40, he said. "It's an antique," I said, my voice rising. "The craftsmanship alone is worth more than that. And the sentiment." "I don't pay for sentiment," he interrupted, looking me in the eye for the first time. He wasn't mean. He was just finished. 40 is the best I can do. Silver is down. I felt a wave of nausea. $40. It wasn't enough for the inhaler and the light bill. It wasn't even enough for the inhaler copay. If the pharmacist decided to be difficult about the brand name, I looked at the locket. I thought about the lock of hair inside. I thought about Mark's healing photos. "I'll take it," I said. I walked out of the shop with 2 $20 bills. I felt lighter, but not in a way that felt like freedom. It felt like I was slowly being erased. I made it to the pharmacy. The line was long, filled with people who looked as tired as I felt. When I got to the counter, the pharmacist looked at the prescription. "That'll be $52, she said. I thought it was 50, I stammered. Price went up on the 1st of the month. Supply chain stuff. I reached into my purse and pulled out the $40. I searched the bottom of my bag, my fingers frantic, hitting crumbs, old receipts, a stray bobby pin. I found a $5 bill and some change. $47.60. "I'm short," I whispered. "I'm $5 short." I looked at Maya, who was looking at a display of stuffed animals. She didn't know the math. She didn't know her lungs were being appraised for $5. The woman behind me, an older lady in a faded floral coat, stepped forward and tapped a $5 bill on the counter. "I've got it," she said. "Oh no, I can't." "Take it," she said firmly. "I've been $5 short before. Just get the medicine." I couldn't look at her. If I looked at her, I would cry. And if I started crying, I wouldn't be able to stop until Wednesday. I took the inhaler. thanked the woman with a nod I hoped conveyed the depth of my desperation, and walked out. The bus ride to the utility office was a blur. I sat there with the inhaler in my lap, clutching it like a talisman. I had the medicine, but the lights were still off. The egg carton was sitting on my counter at home, the contents slowly warming. I had failed the second half of the 2 a.m. math. When I got to the utility office, the waiting room was packed. A digital screen told me I was number 42. They were currently serving number 11. I looked at the clock. It was 3:45 p.m. They closed at 5 o'clock. I sat down on a hard plastic chair. Maya leaned against my arm and started to cough. It was a deep, wet sound this time. I took the new inhaler out of the box, primed it, and held it to her mouth. "Big breath, baby," I said. As she inhaled, the sound of the medicine puffing into her lungs felt like the only victory I would get. I watched the clock. At 4:50 p.m., my number was called. I walked up to the plexiglass window. The woman on the other side looked like she had seen 1,000 versions of me today. "I need to pay my bill and get my power turned back on," I said. I don't have the full amount, but I can pay $40 today. The minimum for reconnection is $75, plus the outstanding balance, she said, her voice a flat monotone. "Please," I said, leaning closer to the glass. "I have a child with asthma. It's the weekend. My fridge is off. I just need a grace period. I get paid on Wednesday. I promise, I'll bring the rest then." She looked at her computer screen. She looked at Maya. Then she sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh that seemed to carry the weight of the entire city. "I can't change the fee," she said, "but I can flag it as a medical emergency if you have a doctor's note. That gives you a 48-hour extension." "I have the inhaler," I said, holding up the box. "The prescription is on it. Her name is right there." She hesitated, then began typing. "I'm not supposed to do this without the official form from the clinic, but I'll put it through as a pending medical hardship. The power should be back on within 4 hours. Don't make me regret this." I walked out of that building feeling like I had just survived a shipwreck. The sun was setting, casting long, orange shadows across the pavement. I had $40 left in my pocket from a second pawn, a gold wedding band I'd hidden in a shoe, which I had done while Maya was looking at the stuffed animals. It was enough for gas and a gallon of milk. When we got home, the house was still dark. I lit a candle and sat on the floor with Maya. We played I Spy in the flickering light. Around 8 p.m., the overhead light in the kitchen suddenly flared to life. The refrigerator groaned, sputtered, and then began its low, steady hum. I stood up and went to the kitchen. I put the milk in the fridge. I looked at my legal pad. The 2 a.m. math was solved for today, but the board was already being cleared for tomorrow. I knew that on Monday, I'd have to find a way to get that medical form from the doctor, which meant a copay I didn't have. I knew that the pending hardship was just a stay of execution. I sat down and opened my laptop. I went to Mark's page. There was a new photo. He was sitting around a bonfire with a group of people, all of them laughing, their faces illuminated by the orange glow. "Grateful for this community," he wrote. "Realizing that true wealth isn't about what's in your bank account, but what's in your soul." I stared at his soul. I stared at the bonfire. I thought about the silver locket that was now sitting in a glass case on 4th Street. I thought about the woman who gave me $5 because she knew what it felt like to be short. I didn't feel grateful. I didn't feel centered. I felt like a soldier who had just cleared one trench, only to see 10 more stretching out to the horizon. But I stood up, walked to the fridge, and checked the eggs. They were still cool to the touch. I realized then that the quiet miracle isn't that the money appears. It's that you don't break. It's that you keep performing the math even when the numbers are designed to destroy you. You become a master of the invisible war. You learn to live in the gap between what you have and what they need, and you stretch yourself until you are the bridge. I went into Maya's room and watched her sleep. The rattle was gone, replaced by a clean, silent breath. I reached out and touched her hair. I couldn't admit to her, and I could barely admit to myself, that I was terrified of Wednesday. I was terrified of the moment the bridge would finally snap, but as I lay down in the dark, I didn't think about the locket or the light bill. I thought about the sound of the refrigerator. It was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. It was the sound of one more day. Tomorrow, I would find another $5. Tomorrow, I would find another way to stay silent about the cost. Because the only thing more expensive than speaking up was the price of letting the roof fall in, and as long as I was standing, the roof was staying up. I closed my eyes and did the math one more time. 0 plus 0 plus 0. It didn't add up to anything, yet somehow, here we were. We were still here.